It was one of those autumn afternoons that seemed to drip with nostalgia, where the world smelled of burning leaves and you could feel the crisp bite of winter hiding just around the corner. I was driving back to my old hometown of Elkwood, a place I hadn't visited since I was 18. My mother had finally sold the house I grew up in, and it was my job to sort through whatever was left in the garage before the new owners moved in. The thing about Elkwood, it always felt like a ghost town, even when it wasn't. Maybe it was the way the mist clung to the old water tower, or how the town square always seemed empty, the benches covered in dead leaves. Or maybe it was the feeling, that persistent, itching feeling, that there were things you couldn't see, just watching. When I pulled up to our old house on Birch Street, it looked almost the same. A little more run down, sure. The shutters were loose, the paint was peeling, and the big oak in the front yard was bare, its branches twisted like gnarled old fingers. But the place hadn't changed as much as I thought it would. Maybe that was why the feeling of unease settled over me so fast, like a blanket I couldn't shake off. I got out of the car, grabbed my duffel bag, and made my way inside. The house was empty now, stripped of all its furniture and memories, save for a few stray boxes in the garage. As I stepped into the living room, the silence was thick, almost oppressive. It felt like the house itself was holding its breath. Just a couple of boxes, I muttered to myself, hoping the sound of my own voice would cut through the tension. It didn't. The garage door was stuck, swollen with age, so I had to give it a solid shove. It opened with a groan that seemed to echo far longer than it should have. The garage was dim, the single light bulb casting shadows that seemed to slither and twist in the corners. I found the boxes easily enough, all marked with my name in my mother's familiar handwriting. And then I saw it. Tucked behind an old lawnmower, covered in cobwebs and dust, was a large, metal locker. The kind they used to have in high school gyms, with a small, rusted padlock hanging from the latch. I didn't remember ever seeing it before, and that was strange, because I remembered everything about this house. The idea that something could have been here all these years, unnoticed, made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Curiosity is a hell of a thing. I fished around in one of the boxes until I found a rusty old pair of bolt cutters, and with a single snap, the padlock broke. The locker door creaked open, revealing something I'd never expected. It was filled with Polaroids. Hundreds of them, stacked in neat little rows like a macabre gallery of memories. My hand shook as I picked up the first one. It was a picture of a man, maybe in his 30s, with a thick mustache and a wide, unnatural grin. He was sitting in our living room, right on the old plaid couch that used to be my dad's favorite spot. The weird thing, I didn't recognize him. I flipped the Polaroid over, and there, in my mother's handwriting, was a date, November 12, 1998. I picked up another Polaroid. This one showed a woman, sitting at our kitchen table, her head tilted at an odd angle, her eyes wide and unblinking. The date on the back read March 4, 1999. I didn't recognize her either. Every photo I looked at had a different person in it, all of them posed somewhere in our house, all of them with expressions that were just a bit off. Some were grinning too wide, showing too many teeth. Others looked terrified, their mouths open in silent screams. But the worst part was that they all had that same, empty, glassy look in their eyes. "What the hell?" I whispered, backing away from the locker. That's when the whispering started. It was faint at first, a rustle of voices so soft I thought I was imagining it. But it grew louder, a chorus of hushed murmurs that seemed to echo off the walls. I turned around, my pulse racing, but the garage was empty. Empty, except for the shadows, which now seemed to creep along the walls, twisting and writhing like something alive. I tried to convince myself it was just a trick of the light. I tried, but then one of the Polaroids fell from my hands, drifting to the concrete floor. I reached down to pick it up, and that's when I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. I spun around, my breath catching in my throat. Standing in the doorway to the house was a woman. Her hair was tangled, her eyes wide and unblinking, and her mouth hung open in a silent scream. She was the woman from one of the Polaroids, and she was staring straight at me. I stumbled back, my heart slamming against my ribs. "Who are you?" I managed to choke out, but she didn't respond. Instead, she took a step forward, her bare feet dragging against the floor, leaving wet, dark footprints that glistened in the dim light. And then she smiled. A slow, creeping grin that split her face in two, showing teeth that were too white, too perfect. "Remember me?" she whispered, her voice like nails scraping against glass. The whispering chorus around me grew louder, and I realized, with a bone-deep horror, that it wasn't coming from outside the house. It was coming from inside the locker. The shadows spilled out, curling along the floor, wrapping around my ankles. I tried to run, but I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The woman's face twisted, her grin widening, and her eyes rolled back into her head. "You invited us," she crooned, her voice layered with dozens of others. "We've been waiting." The locker door slammed shut, and suddenly, the garage was filled with people. The figures from the Polaroids. They crowded around me, their hands clawing at my clothes, their eyes blank and lifeless. Their touch was cold, burning into my skin, and their mouths opened wide, spilling out black, inky shadows. I screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the darkness. When I woke up, I was lying on the driveway, the cold concrete pressing into my back. My mother was standing over me, her face pale, her hands trembling. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice tight with fear. I sat up, looking around. The garage door was closed, the house quiet, but the locker was gone. Like it had never existed. My mother wouldn't meet my eyes as she helped me to my feet, and when I asked her about the locker, about the photos, she shook her head. "Some things are better left forgotten," she whispered. "But I can't forget." Even now, weeks later, I still hear the whispers in the middle of the night. And sometimes, when I'm alone, I catch glimpses of them, the people from the photos, their eyes wide, their smiles too wide. They are waiting, just beyond the shadows, waiting for me to open the door again. And I know that one day, I won't be able to resist.